Hi, I'm Neil Barker from AppleiPodParts.com and welcome to my video on how to repair the power button on an iPhone 4. It's not a direct replacement, so we're not replacing the cable, but we're actually repairing the button. We use this really successfully and it's an option as to not removing the whole cable. So the first thing we do is obviously the two bottom screws on this iPhone. These aren't my hands, by the way, but this is certainly our video. The two screws on the iPhone 4 come out and then you can push open the rear casing and they have the iPhone 4 in itself. So obviously we start removing the battery, and as you can see we've got isosmo, we've got screwdrivers, we've got spudger, and we've got our screw tray. You can get all these tools, parts and accessories on our website AppleiPodParts.com. So you're pretty much going to be removing everything down to the screen level. As I said before, this is not a replacement of the power button being quite a common problem in the 4 and the 4S, but we're not going to replace the whole cable because you get into, it's quite difficult, it's quite painful, but we're going to replace the actual cap, and that's the thing that fails, the cap on the power button, instead of replacing the whole cable. So we're taking the screws out there, we've got a dot connector, and we're going to lift out the dot connector cable. You've got to be really careful as you do this. What you don't want to do is get the tools under and knock off any resistors on the board. So just be extremely careful as you're popping connectors up and stuff like that. Also, again, there, be really careful and really gentle when you're lifting the battery connector. Remove that little tab from under the battery connector, because we get a lot of people that force this and they pluck the actual connector off the board. There we go, and the little antenna cable as well, just lifting that up with a little tool, a little non-marking tool. One thing I always say is use as much care as you can when lifting all connectors and stuff. There's so many tiny components that you can easily pluck a resistor off the board that will completely make your iPhone fail. So we've got a little water indicator here, this screw in the middle of the board. Just gently lift the water indicator up. It's always good to keep that and not just plough it off. Undo that screw, and again, it's quite an easy one to forget that because it's tucked away underneath that little white, the little dab patch. Top of the screw, top of the board screw there comes out, and then you're into taking all the tiny little screws out of this top black plate. They're all different sizes, and again we put it in a little tool tray. We know where they go once we come to put it back together, and that is key. It really is. These are all all Phillips head screws, so they come out nice and easily, and put in their little different compartments. This top black plate that we're removing is actually key to Wi-Fi. If you don't put that plate, or you don't put the screws back in, then you're gonna weaken your Wi-Fi area. It's almost like an antenna. So not a lot of people know that, but that's true. And I wonder why you don't get Wi-Fi when you don't put all those screws back in. So we can lift the loudspeaker out. You can either do this with the board out or before the board goes. It's not critical, but it comes out, and it makes it a little bit easier to sort of remove the battery without having to lever against the board or anything. So run a little spudger under there. Again, plastic tool, comes away quite easily. Some batteries can be really stubborn, and but this one's not too bad. And then we remove the SIM tray. We get so many people trying to jam, I think they've got all the screws out, and then trying to lift the board out while leaving that little SIM tray in, and boy, does that make a mess. Remove that little Wi-Fi antenna off. Again, gently, when you're lifting these connectors up as well. My guy's done it so many times before, but you've got to be so careful. You get that plastic tool and you just need to get the connector, because if you go too far in, you're going to snap off resistors off the board, and again, that's it. You could find yourself, the phone won't power up. And remove the LCD and digitizer cables there, and yeah, just got to be gentle, take it easy, don't force anything. If anything needs to be forced, then there's a problem. Then we're going to remove there's a turret screw just in this top bit. It's got a flat sort of screwdriver head on it. That's the final thing to come out, and then we lift the board. As you see there, you lift the board bottom first, it lifts up, and then you pull it, retract it out towards the bottom of the phone. That is because the board sits in a groove at the top of the phone, just where my finger is there, or not mine. So there you go. The power button is what we need to get to now, and that's across that plastic bracket. There's two screws, and again, they're different sizes, so you need to keep them separate. And you've got to gently hold down the screen connectors down to get to this second screw. It's a bit of a pain. You do run the risk of snagging the screen connector. So, I mean, a good practice is you might as well remove the screen while you do it. But it's up to you. It depends how far you want to go down into it. And but you do risk snagging those screen cables. So just be careful. If you're unsure, take the screen off. It's not much more work if you know what you're doing, and it makes this job a little bit easier. So there you go. We lift up this little black plastic bar, and on the back of this bar, and you've got to be so careful, all these cables are all in there, and they're all really fragile. And we lift this black bracket up, and there you can see by the thumb is a little gold head of the power button. What we're going to do is we're going to lift there's the Captain tape, which is a gold coloured tape that holds the actual popper button. This holds it onto it, and it's just stuck down very slightly, and you'll see when you open yours up, you'll see that it's literally just a rectangular bit of tape with a silver button in the middle. What happens when the power button fails and loses its click is that there's a little plastic nipple, for want of a better word, yes I did say that, on that tape. The nipple breaks off, and of course you lose the spacer. Now here's the trick. We're using an iPod Touch 4th generation home button, which is a lot cheaper, and it's the expendable part. We're going to use the cap off of that, which is exactly the same but stronger, because I think they realised they had this problem and they started making these stronger. So we're going to peel this gold bit of tape off using a very edge of a scalpel blade again. Mind your fingers, use anything hopefully not sharp, and don't damage yourself. If you're not sure, don't try it, but even a pair of tweezers, just lift the gold tape off with the cap, and we're going to transfer it over onto our existing home button, the rest of it, to get it working again. So as you can see, it's a really tricky process. We're trying to lift the tape off with the cap without getting any finger marks on it, make sure it's still sticky, and it's a pretty difficult process, but it saves you having to replace the whole cable. You saves you inducing the problems where sometimes your screens won't black out if you get a cable that isn't compatible with it, or all that sort of thing, and it saves you having to remove that whole thing which is connected to your earpiece, all that sort. It's painful. Once you've done this job a couple of times, it's actually quite straightforward and a darn sight easier than removing that whole cable for no reason. So I've got the tape off, and as you can see with the little cap on it with a little nipple, takes good eyesight and a bit of dexterity, but it's well worth it. And as you can see, it's the iPod Touch 4th generation home button flex. You can get it on our site, AppleiPodParts.com. So you're left there with a little silver cap and the sticker with the silver cap on, and it's almost like it sandwiches it. So you've got the back piece of the button you can see on the top of the iPhone still there. You've got the little silver cap spacer, and then you've got the gold Captain tape with the popper on as well. And you'll see on the top of there is a little black piece of plastic, and that is what you lose in the first place. So the rest of the button and the cable's fine, and we're replacing the bit that sort of snaps off. And again, the iPod Touch 4th gen home button flex is a lot stronger, and the little sort of tip on it that breaks off there. So we're carefully trying to position it. So obviously you've got the back part of the button, a little silver cap, and then the silver cap and the brown tape goes over the top. Sounds complicated. When you open it up, you'll know when you see it. And obviously my colleague's hair is in the way, so you can't see a great deal. But what you can see now is a tiny little dab of super glue, and I'm talking the tiniest dip on the 4 corners of this bit of tape. Literally just holds it in place. The tape will hold, and when you clamp it all back together, the clamp will do the rest. So there we go. We leave it to dry, and you'll be able to see there, although not as clear as I'd like it, you can see the power button there. Looked as it was, but with that little black dot in the middle. That's the key thing. That's what falls out and stops your power button from working. Although this is quite a tricky job, it's not as hard as actually changing the whole cable, with removing the earpiece and all that and everything. So the little black spacer goes in, and you'll see there with my tweezers, there's a little silver triangular shaped metal piece. You hold that down, you've got to push the black bar down into place, and you've almost got to pull the metal tang back and push the bar in. You'll see when you get there, and then you can test the button. And actually, with holding the black bar at the back and pressing the button, you'll feel that it's got a nice positive click again. So you go for the screws back in place, starting with that outside one because it's easy to locate, and then we're going to go for the one behind the screen cables. Now, as I said before, if you need to remove the screen and you're not confident about, you might snag these screen cables, and it's easy to do, and it means you need to replace the screen if you do it. So you've been warned. Then take the screen off. It's a lot easier. if you're not competent. So you're not happy to do that. So the 2 screws are in there, and you just need to tighten up the second one. But already you can feel the positive push of the power button. I keep saying home button, but it's the power button. And it is that black spot, that black nipple, that black spacer, whatever you want to call it. That is what it takes out the slack in that button and allows you to give it a good click. It's a common fault. It falls off. There you go. But using an iPod Touch 4th generation home button flex, which you can be found on our site, AppleiPodParts.com, that is the sort of the sneak top tip trick, again, whatever you want to call it, to repairing this cable, this button, without replacing it. There's not much in cost, I can't imagine. The sense cable is a little bit more, but it's the difficulty, and especially when you have a lot of issues with the sensitization cable on there, a lot of compatibility issues, screen's not blanking when you need, after repairs. We've had all sorts of people speak to us about those sort of problems. That, to be honest, it's better to repair it, especially if you're doing quite a lot of them. So the loudspeaker is going to go in there. What you need to do is you put the loudspeaker in place, and there's little tangs that ground out the antenna cable to the chassis of the phone. They're key to, Apple don't put things in there for no reason, and they're key to spreading the antenna load across the bezel and grounding it out as well. So you need to put those tangs in. Make sure you push them out as you're pushing the loudspeaker in, otherwise they break off. And the more you lose, the worse your signal's going to be. The screw in there to hold the loudspeaker in. Now with the board, you go in top first, and then you gently push the cable down, the board down, minding that antenna cable at the bottom. There with the tweezers, you just make sure that's out of the way. It's easy to clamp it underneath the board. As I always say, if there's an issue with the board going down, or you feel any bounce or any resistance, there's something in the way. Stop, lift it up, have a look, start again. Never force anything on these, otherwise you will break something. A little screw in here. What you want to do is, once you put the board down, you're keeping your finger on the loudspeaker while you're doing that, because those little tangs I mentioned, they'll allow the loudspeaker to spring back up. So when you put the board down, you need to check those tangs are still in place, it's still tucked in, and the actual speaker's down. Then you put that screw in at the bottom of the board, and it holds it all nicely, and then you can go about putting all the rest in. Put the little turret screw back in there where my finger is. Again, little flat blade screwdrivers needed for that, and that holds the board down. And then we're going to go for those little cables. Now the little cables find their own way. Don't force them. If they don't click in nicely, they're not lined up. Do not force them. Another little trick I do is when I'm finished, I use the back of a blue tool, the plastic tool, just to push down the back of every connector so that I know they're 100% in. They might give a nice click, but you need to make sure they're all there. So there's all the flat connectors in, dot connectors in, and the 3 cables, the 2 screen cables, boards down nicely, and then we can slot the SIM tray back in there. There's no bounce. So this Wi-Fi antenna goes in. It goes in from bottom to top, and because basically if you look at it, there's 2 little tangs where just under where the finger is, and they hook in, and then you can push it gently towards the top of the phone. Again, it sits in nicely. If there's any bounce or it won't, there's a problem. All the screws go in. Obviously, every single one's different, so be gentle and screw all those back into place. Make sure you don't miss any out. Obviously, that'll degrade your Wi-Fi. This screw here, the one on the right corner, that's key not to over tightening, because that's the one that connects the Wi-Fi to the actual Wi-Fi antenna. The sort of the flat piece that goes at the top. So you gradually put all those screws back in place. You've got the long screw at the top. That also has an effect, and that grounds against the board. And you're on the homeward stretch, really. Again, just make sure that everything's carried over, all the little tags are in place. This little keep plate over the dot connector stops that from coming up. And again, the screws are different, so you've got to make sure that you have them in the right size and the right sides. And we're going to replace this little water dot. It's good practice. You could leave it out, but to be honest, that's not what we're about. We're about detail. They're there for a reason, so we'll put it back. That goes on to a whole rant that I normally have about the fact that things are in there for a reason. Carry them over. Apple wouldn't waste their time and money producing little bits of rubber and little bumpers and stuff just for the laugh. So I always say carry them over, when you're replacing parts as much as you can, because they are there for a reason. Right, these fingers are working away. Again, all the parts and tools at AppleiPodParts.com. And we're just about there, not far away from the battery. The battery, this little keep plate, it sits over the antenna, little connector, but it also grounds out against the back cover, and I think it gives you a signal boost as well. So that goes in first, then the battery connector goes over the top. Nice positive click. Battery sits in comfortably and flush. And I'll tell you a little trick about this. If you deform the battery by lifting it up, because it's quite soft, and sometimes it happens, it's always good practice to flatten it back out on a bench top, because if that battery is not flat, when you put that back cover back on, you will see that any slight sort of uneven surface will show on the back of the screen, and you'll get high points in the screen and white marks, and it'll all be because the battery is putting pressure because it's not flat. So there's a little trick there. Not a lot of people realise that. So there we go. Back cover slides on. We can power it up so we know the power button's working, and then the 2 screws in the bottom. You see this is quite an early iPhone 4 because it's got the crosshead screws. Apple phasing those out in the early days to somehow stop us from opening them up. I'm not quite sure how that works for the torque screw. So there we go, that's a repair on the iPhone 4 power button. Not a replacement, not a cable replacement, but a repair using the iPod Touch 4th Gen Home Button Flex. Nice little trick. Fiddly, complicated. Hopefully this video will help you sort it out. That with a boatload of patience, parts, tools and everything from AppleiPodParts.com. We don't sell the patience, that's for you. I'm Neil Barker. There's one repair, all nicely done. Yeah, Neil Barker at AppleiPodParts.com. Thanks for watching.